Back to Path of the Barbell. Today I'm going to be doing my annual World's Strongest Man predictions, World's Strongest Man 2022, which is going to be a very interesting year, I think. So let's get right into it. As you see, I clearly chose the absolute best pictures I could find for my top 5. So, the qualifier events this year are the loading race, which is supposedly pretty light this year, and then a deadlift ladder that goes all the way up to 400 kg, a car walk, which is basically a yoke, that's a little more awkward, and then a log lift for max reps at 145 kg, which is again very light. And then there's a grip event. It's the wrecking ball hold for maximum time. So kind of like the Hercules hold, but it's essentially like holding onto a power stairs implement. And then you have the stone eliminator, everyone's favorite event. So group 1, we have Tom Stoltman, Ivar Schmockstellis, Kevin Ferris, Manuel Angelo, Gabriel Room, and then Pa O'Dwyer. My picks for this group are Tom Stoltman and Kevin Ferris. I think Tom wins the group pretty confidently, and I think Kevin comes in second. I believe Ivers could very well defeat Kevin, and it could be Tom and Ivers. I think it's a really close call. That being said, I think Kevin comes in second in this group. I think he beats Ivers on the grip hold and maybe the moving events. So that means he has the advantage in the stone eliminator, and he gets to go second and just has to match Ivers. And I think that'll give him the edge. That being said, Ivers is a really phenomenal stone lifter, so he might even be too much for Kevin, even if he comes third. So we'll see on that one. The next group is Brian Shaw, Konstantin Janasha, Bobby Thompson, Mitchell Hooper, Gabriel Pena, and Mark Felix. This is the first death group that we're going to see today. Horribly brutal group. I don't know who put this together and who thought it was a good idea to essentially put the top 6 deadlifters in the entire competition, save for a couple guys, all in one group. But here we are. This is a really tough group to predict, because initially I would say Brian Shaw, considering he's won 12 years in a row for his group. But when you look at the events, I honestly think they're better for Konstantin. If we look at the the light loading race, it's usually not Brian's favorite event, but he did well last year, came in second in his group to Maxime Boudreau, who's really good at those types of events. So we could see him do decent on this, but I could see Konstantin and Mitchell Hooper both beating him on this, and maybe Mark Felix, who's also really good at loading events. So Brian could place bottom half on this, potentially. Then the deadlift ladder, Brian could also place bottom half. Log lift for reps, I think Brian probably comes in second to Bobby Thompson in this lineup. Brian's a very solid log lifter, and a lot of people say he's weak, when he really isn't. It's just he's weak at log compared to a lot of his other events, but he's still a very, very solid log lifter. And in this lineup, Gabriel Pena and Mark Felix, you know he's going to beat them. I would favor him slightly over Konstantin Janasha, especially after Janasha's poor performance on log at the Europe's Strongest Man competition a few months ago. So it really only leaves Bobby Thompson and Mitchell Hooper, and Brian is more experienced than Mitchell Hooper on log, so I favor him. I think Bobby wins and then Brian comes second. Similar story with the car walk. Brian has a great track record, but I think he would actually prefer it to be a little heavier. So I could see him losing out to guys like maybe Mitchell Hooper, who's phenomenal at yoke, but he doesn't have experience on the car walk implement, so it's unusual. I could see him lose to Konstantin. We saw last year in the final at World's Strongest Man, Konstantin beat Brian on the yoke event. So again, Konstantin could beat him. And then Bobby Thompson might have a chance, but I favor Brian over Bobby, to be totally honest. Wrecking ball hold is another one that Brian can lose big points on. People say he has a great grip, and in some ways he does when it comes to crushing power, but when you look at his track record for endurance over the last 3 years or so, he has not done too hot. I think Konstantin Janasha and maybe Mitchell Hooper and definitely Mark Felix all beat him on this event. So again, I've been saying Konstantin Janasha a lot, and that's because I think Konstantin beats Brian on this. That being said, I do think Brian makes it out of the group for sure. I think it'd be very unlikely for him to place fourth or lower in this lineup. Um, and I don't see anyone in this lineup being able to touch him on the Stone Eliminator. Even Constantine, I think he would beat pretty confidently on that. So I have Constantine winning, and then Brian coming second or third, probably second, with Mitchell Hooper or Bobby Thompson coming third, and then Brian beats them in the Stones. Group 3, the other group of death. Horrible group. Poor Alexi always gets the worst groups every single year. It's actually pretty sad, but here we are. Um, we have Alexei Novikov, Trey Mitchell, yet again in the same group as Alexei. Then we have Adam Bishop, Rob Kearney, Gregor Szymanski, and Mika Toro. There's 4 guys in this group who could very deservedly make the final. You know, look at those top 4. That's a strong group right there. I think Trey Mitchell pretty confidently wins this group, to be totally honest. He loses to Alexei on the loading race, but he destroys him on the deadlift ladder and the log lift for reps. And to be honest, I don't think this is Alexei's best version of himself. He hasn't been able to train fully for obvious reasons, and he's only had, I think, 3 training sessions for Worlds. So that's not an ideal situation to be in. We could see Alexei drop points on the deadlift ladder, like I said. Car walk, it's hard to say, but Rob Kearney is very dangerous on that event. And then the wrecking ball hold, I could see, well, I think Alexei might win that event. So I think Trey wins, and then Alexei and Adam make second and third place. But I feel like Adam could edge him out on the stones. That is a bold prediction, and I know a lot of people are going to get upset with me for saying Alexei goes without making the finals yet again for another year, but he got another horrible group, and I don't see a ton of events here that he could really win. The loading race maybe, the car walk maybe, but other than that, I think he has a hard time in this group. And there's Mika Toro. He could snag some points from him too. I don't think Mika Toro is a threat to make the Stone Eliminator, but he's good enough at some of the events that he could cause some problems. So we'll see on that. So my top picks are Trey Mitchell and then Adam Bishop from that group. In Group 4, we have Martins Lisis, Maxime Boudreau, Pavlo Kordiakov, sorry if I messed that up, and then Shane Flowers, Gavin Bilton, and Nedzman Antbiskovich. I think Martins is the clear winner in this group, although you could make an argument for Maxime. The only issue is the deadlift ladder, which Maxime will probably drop big points on. That being said, he could beat Gavin Bilton or maybe Pavlo on that event, so who knows. The loading race, Maxime could win. Car walk, I think he also drops points on. Log lift, Maxime could win, and then the wrecking ball hold, he could place big on. But Martins is really great at grip as well. So I think Martins wins, and then Maxime comes second, and then probably Pavlo comes third, or maybe Shane Flowers. It's hard to say, but I favor Pavlo. And then I think Maxime beats him on the Stone Eliminator. I think there's probably only 2 or 3 guys who could even hope to beat Maxime on the Stone Eliminator. So those are my top 2 picks for Group 4. And then Group 5, probably the weakest group other than maybe Group 1. We have Luke Stoltman, Evan Singleton, Ithor Melstead, Kim Uyarek, John Steven Korabuth, and Kelvin DeReuter. The obvious picks are Luke Stoltman and Evan Singleton, but I actually believe Evan is going to win this group, with Luke coming second and then beating Ithor in the Stone Eliminator. I think Evan beats Luke on the deadlift, potentially the loading race, but that's a close call. Potentially the car walk. Log lift, I think, goes to Luke. Wrecking ball hold definitely goes to Evan. And then, Stone Eliminator, at that point, Evan will have won. So it'll just be Luke beating Ithor, in my opinion, to make the final. So, where does that leave us with our finalists? It leaves us with Tom and Kevin for Group 1, Constantine and Brian for Group 2, Trey and Adam for Group 3, Martins and Maxime Group 4, Evan Singleton and Luke Stoltman for Group 5. The final events are quite a bit different than the heats, and I think they favor some very different athletes compared to the heats. I think Brian does a lot better in the final than he does in the heats, and I think who else? Um, Maxime. I think Maxime does a lot better in the final than he does in the heats as well. So we have the Nax Giants medley, which is a large box carry into a super yoke. We don't know exactly what the weight's going to be, but it's probably going to be somewhere between 1,000 and 1,100 pounds. Then we have the deadlift for reps, which I believe is a car deadlift for reps at around 750 pounds, but it might just be a standard deadlift for reps. That being said, they did that last year, so I kind of doubt it. I think it's probably a car deadlift. And then we have the Flintstone Lift, which is a push press, or however you want to do it, from blocks. You can push behind or in front of the head. Lots of the guys are doing behind the neck press or split jerk. A couple of them are going to press in front of them, or at least I saw some training. But that was guys like Mitchell Hooper, who I don't think makes the final, even though I really love for him to, and it's very possible. But that's probably going to be most guys pushing behind the neck. Then you have the bus pole, power stairs, and Atlas stones, which are all pretty uniform. So next, the NAC Giants medley. I believe Tom wins this event. Looking at last year, Tom won basically the exact same event, except instead of a box load into yoke, it was a frame into yoke. And Tom is much better at odd objects and loading than he is at frame. He is good at frame, don't get me wrong, but loading events are arguably one of his top events, right behind stones. So I think he's very hard to beat on this kind of event this year. I think Evan Singleton will do extremely well also. He is very quick, very explosive, and he's amazing at yoke. And then I think Martins will finish the top 3 on this event. I could see him slipping out of that group. I could see Brian or Luke or Adam taking it from him. But I think Martins comes out on top. Then in the mid-pack, like I mentioned, Brian, Luke, and Adam. And then I have Konstantin Janasha, who actually placed really well on this event. He got second last year in what was almost the same event. But I think he favors having a frame into yoke. He is good at loading events, but I don't know. It's hard to say. The mid-pack is really close on this event. It's really only Tom and Evan that I'm pretty confident on for my placement. And in the bottom of the pack, I have Trey Mitchell and Maxime Boudreau. Neither of these guys really enjoy yoke carries, to be totally honest. And while Maxime is really quick, so he could do well on the first half of this event, I think the yoke hurts him enough that he drops towards the bottom. And I think with Trey, it's just not a good event for him overall. He doesn't have the best conditioning necessarily. He's not that fast, and he does not enjoy yoke or loading events, to be totally honest, besides Atlas Stones. So that's my bottom 2 on that event. Then we have the deadlift for reps. This one I have Adam winning if it is a standard deadlift. If it is a car deadlift, I could really see that placement changing potentially. I could see Trey and Brian both rising above him. Potentially Martins, very experienced athlete as well. But Adam is a phenomenal deadlifter for max, but especially for reps. He's insane at deadlift for reps. So I have Adam winning, and then Trey coming in second. He did phenomenal on this event last year in the final. And then I have Brian rounding out the top 3. Normally I wouldn't put Brian in the top 3, but with guys like JF Caron gone, I think he does enough to get top 3. That being said, it's going to be very close between him and Tom and Martins, and I would not be surprised if a couple of those guys tied with each other. And then I have Konstantin Janasha. I think Konstantin's another guy who could really push for that podium spot. And then Evan Singleton and Kevin Ferris, both solid deadlifters. Evan's a better deadlifter than Kevin, don't get me wrong. But I don't think in this kind of a lineup, Evan's going to be pushing for top 3 on that event. Kevin, I think, will do enough to stay mid-pack, but only because Luke Stoltman and Maxime Boudreau really struggle with deadlift in general. Luke has made some big improvements recently, but I think he would have preferred the deadlift ladder for the final instead of deadlift for reps. Um, that being said, I wouldn't be super surprised if Luke did beat Kevin on this event, but I have a hard time seeing Maxime Boudreau place anywhere but last, to be totally honest, unless somebody gets injured. So, Flintstone Lift. This one was very hard to predict because we haven't seen it in a very long time. But I actually placed Tom Stoltman at number one. Now, normally, Tom, I would place middle or lower end of the pack when it comes to overhead events. But when it comes to this lift, if you watch his training, he's done 230 kg, and it looked very, very, very confident. He actually looked stronger than Luke on this event, which is rare. Normally, overhead events favor Luke over Tom, but Tom has, to my knowledge, the biggest training lift shown so far. Maxime Boudreau also had a extremely easy 210 kg. I put him up there. He's very explosive, but again, he had, if I remember correctly, he has some kind of shoulder issue going on, or he did not too long ago, so I could see him dropping out. Trey Mitchell is another one who's just so strong overhead, it's really hard to say exactly what's going to happen with him, but I would not be surprised if he was in that top three at all. Then we have Adam Bishop, I believe, places top four on this event for sure. He, I believe, also pressed 230 overhead. He could really push Tom on this event, to be honest. The only reason I don't have him over Maxime and Trey is because they're more established on overhead events, which I know doesn't really make sense because I put Tom at number one. But I'm just going with my gut feeling on this one. I think Adam could do very, very well on this event for sure. Then I have Brian and Martins placing in the mid-pack. I think they will both do well, and they may end up tying and getting decent points with a lot of the other guys that I mentioned before them, but I don't really see either of them pushing to win this. Martins in particular, a lot of people said, oh, he'll do great. He's great at split jerking and Olympic stuff. But if you look at his training, he did 200 kg or 205 kg, and it looked rough. It did not look comfortable whatsoever. So we'll see how Martins does. But then I have Konstantin Janasha and Luke Stoltman also placing mid-pack, and then Evan Singleton and Kevin Ferris at the bottom. Kevin Ferris, maybe he'll surprise me, but he is not amazing at overhead events in general, and I think this is a brutal lineup for him. And Evan Singleton, normally I would place reasonably high on this kind of event. He's very explosive and aggressive, and he has a pretty good overhead press in general, but he has some kind of shoulder injury going on, so that's the reason I put him at the bottom of the pack. We'll see if he's fully recovered. Bus pull. This one I think goes to Tom. I think it's very hard to debate that. If you look at Tom's performance on this type of event in the last 2 or 3 years, he's extremely impressive. The Titans turntable last year, he won. If you look at the Rogue Invitational last year with the Conan's Wheel of Pain, he won. I think Tom is really hard to beat when it comes to vehicle pulls and anything similar to that. I also have Maxime Boudreau placing extremely high on this event. Maxime is a monster when it comes to bus pull and vehicle pulls in general. And then Martins I have placing third. Martins is, again, extremely dangerous on this kind of event. He placed second at the Rogue Invitational behind Tom on the Conan's Wheel, and he's done very well in general on this kind of event. Then in the middle of the pack, I have Brian Shaw towards the top. I think Brian will do well on this event, but he isn't 2011 Brian Shaw, who I think would be one of the favorites to win this kind of event. I think he'll do enough to stay in the race, but I think he has a hard time beating the other guys on this type of event. Then we have Konstantin Janasha, Luke Stoltman, Adam Bishop, and Kevin Ferris, mid-pack. And then towards the bottom, Evan Singleton. This might be a controversial choice, but the reason I put Evan down there is because I heard a rumor that he wasn't able to train this event properly. And that makes a big difference on vehicle pulls. There's a lot of technique that goes into it to maintain your pace and to get the inertia going at the start of the event. So I think that really works against him. And then Trey I put down here because I think Trey's conditioning will, frankly, I think it hurts him on this event. That being said, he might surprise me. We'll see. Power stairs, I have Maxime winning very confidently, to be honest. Um, if you watch his training video with Brian recently, it was actually uploaded on Brian's channel. But Maxime just tore through the power stairs so quickly, and he has, I believe, the Canadian record on this event with a set of power stairs that were heavier than the ones used uh, at Europe's Strongest Man this year. He's insane on power stairs. He's probably #1 in the world. Number 2, I have Tom. I think Tom is very well built for this type of event. Um, he's very tall. His legs aren't super huge. I think he'll do well. I could be wrong on that, but again, if you were going to construct an athlete who's designed to be good at power stairs, they would look like Tom. Evan Singleton is very aggressive, very explosive, like I've said probably 20 times now. I think he will do very well on this kind of event. Martins, I think will do well. Luke Stoltman and Brian Shaw and Konstantin Janasha, Adam Bishop, all those guys I see battling with each other. I don't really see anybody in that group who really stands out over the others. Maybe Martins, maybe Luke, we'll see. But towards the bottom, I have Kevin Ferris, who's going to be the shortest guy in the finals, if he makes it to the final. And I think that really works against him on this kind of event. And then I feel like I'm picking on Trey. I respect Trey a lot. I actually think he's one of the best in the world, like top 5. But these are just not his events, in my opinion. I think this is a really bad event for him. He likes heavy, static, almost powerlifting type events, and I think this is just about as close to the opposite to that as you can really get. Then we go to the Atlas Stones. This one, I felt a lot more confident in predicting, just because they show so much of their training with stones. We've seen them do it a billion times. There's a lot of controversy when it comes to the Atlas Stones. People are saying Martins has never been beaten by Tom. How could he lose? He's going to beat Tom. Look at the Rogue Invitational. And I get where they're coming from, but you have to look at the results for this set of stones specifically. If you look at this set of stones, Tom has the fastest time at 20 seconds and a little bit longer than that. I think it's like 20 and a half seconds, something like that, back in 2020. And the second fastest time at 21 seconds, which was last year. Brian has the second fastest time on this set of Atlas Stones of all time. He got 24 and a half seconds or something like that. The reason I have Maxime above Brian is because he beat him last year, but Brian beat Maxime on this event in 2020, if I recall correctly. I might have that mixed up, but I could see either of those guys beating each other. However, I do slightly favor Maxime, who I think is an incredible stone lifter. And then trailing right outside of that top 3, I have Martins. Martins is a phenomenal stone lifter, don't get me wrong. And yes, he did beat Tom on the Rogue Invitational stones, but those were not standard Atlas stones. And if you look at his absolute best performances on this specific set of stones, which they've used for like 6 years now with the same weight, Tom has better results than him. Brian has a faster time than him, but it's very debatable, I'll grant you that. And I think Maxime has probably cemented himself as the second fastest in the world on this event. So I could see Martins placing higher, potentially as high as second on this event, but I think fourth is more realistic. Then in the middle of the pack, I have Trey Mitchell, who's amazing at stones, but sometimes he's not the fastest. That being said, he did beat Brian at the Shaw Classic last year on the Atlas Stones, so he could sneak up there as well. Luke Stoltman, Evan Singleton, Konstantin Janasha, all very good stone lifters. It's hard to say who would come out on top. And then Kevin Ferris and Adam Bishop towards the bottom. Those guys are both very solid stone lifters. It's just such a stacked lineup that I don't have anywhere else to put them. I can't in good conscience put them any higher. But, they might surprise me. I could see those guys beating Konstantin potentially. But Konstantin is a very consistent athlete. He almost reminds me of JF Caron in some ways. So I think that's my final opinion on the Atlas Stones. Um, Again, it's hard to say. That top four could really shift around, but I'm pretty confident that Tom wins again, unless he screws up and drops uh, one of the stones, or places it too far and it slides over the other end. There is a run in this year with the stones, which could really change things up. So again, you never know exactly what's going to happen. So what are my final placement predictions? Uh, Towards the bottom, I have Kevin Ferris, then Trey Mitchell, who is, again, a phenomenal athlete, but these are not good events for him this year. Then I have Adam Bishop and Luke Stoltman in the middle of the pack, along with Constantine. Um, Again, these guys are all very solid athletes, but I think Luke had better events last year, and he still placed seventh. I think he's improved, so I still have him placing seventh, which I think means it's a more impressive placement, because if you get the same result, but the events were worse for you, then you got better. Luke is one of my absolute favorite strongmen, and I would love to place him higher, but I just don't think these events really allow for that. Then for the top five, I have Evan coming in fifth. Evan has some potentially weaker events, and it really depends on his shoulder, because if his shoulder is healthy, I could see him podium. I genuinely could. I think Evan has some phenomenal events this year, but I think he places probably between sixth and fourth on most events. Then if we move on from him, fourth place I have Maxime Boudreau. Now, I really debated on putting Maxime above Martins, if I'm going to be totally honest. When I go over my results and I look at the statistics, I have Maxime placing top three on four events, which is the overhead press, the bus pull, the power stairs, and the Atlas Stones. But the issue is I also have him placing low on two events, the yoke event and then the deadlift. So I think Martins being more consistent and placing mid-pack or higher on everything grants him a spot on podium over Maxime. But if Maxime has made sufficient improvements to, improve his weaknesses and not drop so many points there, he could really do some damage. So after those guys, I then have Brian and Tom placing 1 and 2 again for the second year in a row. I know a lot of people are going to say I should have had Martins higher than Brian. I should have had Evan and Maxime higher than Brian. But when I actually look at the events, they are great events for him, and I don't see him dropping points anywhere. The only way he drops points is maybe on power stairs if the other guys have better condition than I anticipated. And even then, Brian had a great setup for that. Brian might drop points on the overhead. Overhead isn't his strongest suit. But again, when I look at all of the events on their own, I don't have Brian placing outside of the top 5 or 6 on any of the events, to be totally honest. And I think he places highly on probably 2 or 3 of them, leaning towards 3. So again, that puts him in second. And then looking at Tom, I think Tom is pretty confidently the winner this year. He has insane events. He really, really does. Like if we look at the events, the first event, the knack medley, he could win it. He could win Atlas Stones. He could win the bus pull. He could win the Flintstone press. That one he might drop some points on. Deadlift he'll place well. Power stairs he could win. Again, it's just Tom has so many dangerous weapons that even when he drops points on an event, he's still in the race because he's so dominant in so many other areas. So again, this is just my opinion. Let me know in the comments below what you think, where you think these guys are going to place. Any changes you would have made, particularly if there's anybody from the heat that you think would make it instead of the guys that I chose. The two that stand out to me are Alexi and Ivars. I think if Ivars had made the final, I would probably have him placing mid-pack, probably above Kevin, to be honest. I think he would do reasonably well on the power stairs, really well on the Atlas stones, and then similar to Kevin on the other events, kind of towards the bottom or towards the middle, which I think would place him around 8th or ninth. But if Alexei had made the final, it really depends on what shape he's in. Because if he's in the shape that I think he's in, but he still manages to make the final, I have him probably placing 6th, maybe 5th. But if he's in great shape, if he's in full form, he could do well on the neck medley. Deadlift for reps, he'll probably drop some points just because it's such a strong lineup of deadlifters. The Flintstone press, he would probably do mid-pack, I would guess. Bust pull, probably mid-pack. Power stairs, mid-pack. And Atlas stones, mid-pack. So to be totally honest, I probably have him placing somewhere around, at best, 4th. But realistically, in my opinion, if he makes the final, I have him going closer to 6th place. So that's just my opinion. Again, let me know what you think down below. It was very difficult predicting this year. The heats in particular were crazy for some of them. But again, there's some events in the final that could really throw people off, I think. It's going to be an interesting year. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.